Hey guys! Tonight we drift into a storybook of battles so unnecessary you'll wonder how anyone kept a straight face while writing them down. Picture this, a warm night, the crackle of a single torch sputtering in the wind, and you trudging along in sandals that don't quite fit. Around you, warriors sharpen spears, polish helmets, and argue about cows. Yes, cows. This is one of the most famously pointless sparks for a war in Greek mythology. And you probably won't survive this not from wounds, but from rolling your eyes to hard dots. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know if you're listening from a rainy midnight in London or a sunny morning in Sydney. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The tale begins with King Pheronius of Argos and a herd of particularly enviable cattle. You'd think gods and heroes would have bigger concerns: storms, temples, lightning bolts, but no. Someone decided these cows were worth a battlefield. The war that erupted is usually called the War of the Epigoni, or sometimes folded into stories about raids on Argos, but at its heart was livestock. You picture soldiers tramping through dust, clanging shields, muttering, "I left my olive grove for this." Cows in ancient Greece weren't just burgers waiting to happen. They were wealth, symbols of power, walking dowries. Owning a herd was like flashing the keys to a Ferrari today. Historians still argue whether the cattle war myth reflects some dim echo of real Bronze Age raids, or whether it's just poetic exaggeration. Either way, the image is the same: men in bronze helmets chasing after mooing bewildered animals, while poets in later centuries tried to make it sound epic. One quirky tidbit: some versions suggest the goddess Hera herself may have had an eye on the herd, because cows were sacred to her. Imagine the queen of the gods, already tired of Zeus's antics, watching mortals trip over themselves for her sacred beasts. If she had social media, this would have been her chance to post, "Seriously? You're fighting over my cows?" You keep walking along the dusty road, and the war stretches on. Spears are thrown, insults are traded, and men fall dramatically, all for cattle that will wander off as soon as the battle line breaks. A modern parallel might be to nations spending millions fighting over who gets the last shopping cart at a supermarket. Sure, it's technically an object of value, but is it worth the cost? The battle rages so long that entire families are caught in feuds. Sons take up arms where their fathers left off, because once the cycle of revenge begins, you can't just stop and say, "Never mind, let's have a barbecue instead." The absurdity deepens when you realize that most of the cows were probably already eaten or stolen away in the chaos. Scholars point out that the Greeks loved using cattle raids in stories as shorthand for conflict. They were simple, tangible stakes, but this one feels more like an inside joke that somehow made it into the official mythological canon. You hear the clash of bronze, the thud of shields, and then the quiet lowing of cattle in the distance, completely oblivious to the drama they've caused. In some tellings, entire cities are drawn into the fray. Argos, Thebes, and their neighbors send contingents of warriors, each eager for loot and glory. By the time the dust clears, the original reason the cows barely matters. The war becomes self-sustaining, as wars often do, fueled more by pride than practicality. There's even a strange historical echo here. In early Mesopotamia, city-states genuinely did fight each other over cattle, sheep, and irrigation canals. Wars of cows weren't uniquely Greek. They were a feature of pre-industrial societies everywhere. But while the Sumerians wrote treaties on clay tablets, the Greeks spun theirs into bedtime epics that leave you yawning. At one point, you picture a lone soldier, sweaty and exhausted, staring at a cow-chewing cud. He sighs, mutters something about missing his wife's lentil stew, and trudges back into battle because his general won't admit defeat. It's funny and a little tragic. These are the wars that leave no monuments, no heroic statues, just a lingering sense of wasted energy. The most laughable moment comes when a victorious army finally corrals the herd, only to have the cows scatter in a panic, trampling soldiers and vanishing into the hills. Imagine Homer trying to make that sound noble, and lo, The mighty champions of Argos were undone by stampede, not exactly the stuff of Iliad-level gravitas. And yet, in the broader sweep of Greek myth, these minor wars serve a narrative function. They remind you that not every battle was about destiny or gods. Sometimes, it was just about petty greed and stubborn pride. And that's oddly humanizing. You may not be a bronze-clad warrior, but you've probably fought a pointless argument. Like who left the dishes unwashed, or which remote control batteries still work. Wars of cows are the mythological version of those tiny domestic spats magnified. And painted with epic language, the war winds down not with a grand treaty, but with exhaustion. Cities limp back to normal life, widows mourn, and bards tuck the tale into their repertoire as a cautionary note. You picture an old man telling the story by firelight, and his grandchildren whispering, "Wait, they fought over cows?" Before nodding off, and here you are, nodding too, lulled by the rhythm of hooves in the distance and the strangely comforting thought that even the ancients wasted their time on nonsense. You drift forward, past the embers of one ridiculous skirmish, into another battlefield where the stakes are no higher and the point is no clearer. This time, you stumble into the so-called Lillantine War, fought on the island of Euboea. Now, you'd think an island war would be over something dramatic: pirates, invasions, maybe a god dropping in uninvited. Nope, the big prize was farmland. And not even especially fertile farmland, just a stretch of plain between two neighboring cities, Chalcis and Eretria. You picture two groups of neighbors glaring across a fence, muttering, "That patch of dirt is mine," until somebody picks up a spear. The Lillantine War is historically fascinating in its dullness. It may be one of the earliest recorded wars in Greek history, around the 8th century BCE. Yet details are so fuzzy that historians still argue whether it really happened, the way later writers claimed. Some say it was the first big conflict that pulled in allies from across Greece, Corinth on one side, Samos on the other, like an ancient world preview of international coalitions. Others suspect it was exaggerated by poets who needed filler between Trojan War retellings. Either way, it's remembered as a battle over fields where goats probably outnumbered people. You imagine the scene: dusty lines of hoplites, shields glinting in the sun, marching out to fight over who gets to plant barley where. The wind carries the smell of dry grass and olive wood smoke, and you can't help but laugh at the seriousness of it all. Some versions insist the two cities even swore an oath to avoid using missile weapons, no arrows, no slingshots, so the fighting would stay honorable, which is like banning three-pointers in basketball just to keep the game pure. And just as pointless, a quirky tidbit slides into view. Ancient writers mentioned that the Chalcidians may have had cavalry, unusual for Greek city-states at that time. So, you picture proud horsemen trotting across the plain, kicking up dust, only to realize they're basically fighting over who gets dibs on a slightly flatter field. Horses stomping around for nothing. It feels like an over-budget county fair dot as the war drags on. Other city-states are pulled in, and suddenly it isn't just about land but pride. Alliances, and who gets to say, "We won." If you squint, you see how this tiny war foreshadows the endless conflicts of later centuries. Greek history is packed with squabbles: Sparta versus Athens, Corinth stirring the pot, but here it starts with nothing more than neighborly spite. You trudge through the dust and find yourself musing. How many soldiers fell, never to return, because somebody wanted extra goat pasture? It's the kind of detail that modern archaeologists puzzle over. Did this war really leave mass graves? Did pottery shards shift because of armies passing through? Or was the whole thing mostly hot air, inflated in later songs? Historians still argue whether the Lillantine War was a proper, sustained campaign or just a string of local brawls dressed up as epic history. The more you imagine it, the funnier it gets. A bard sings, "Mighty warriors clashed for the Lillantine plain." Meanwhile, in reality, a farmer shakes his head and says, "That's where I usually graze my sheep." It's the gap between poetic grandeur and ordinary life that makes the story so soothing. You keep walking, and the battlefields blur into each other, plains littered with broken spears, fields where crops never get planted because the men are too busy posturing. Pride keeps the fighting alive long after the farmland has lost its value. and by the time both sides are exhausted, nothing has changed. The plain is still there, the soil still stubborn, and the survivors trudge home with fewer friends and more scars, and yet, this utterly pointless war left a legacy. Later writers remembered it as a milestone. The first time Greeks supposedly used formal alliances in combat. The first time they wrote rules of war like the no arrows clause. If true, it's almost comically imagined setting the precedent for international cooperation not in defense of civilization, but in deciding who gets to farm a rectangle of dirt. It's oddly comforting, though, to know that people 3,000 years ago were just as stubborn about trivial boundaries as modern neighbors fighting over parking spots. You might have had your own Lillantine war, who gets the last piece of pizza, which side of the couch belongs to who, whether the thermostat stays at 72 or 70 for degrees. Petty conflicts dressed up with dramatic energy. The ancients simply swapped thermostats for barley fields. As the war sputters out, you hear the silence that follows. The armies disperse, the alliances fray, and poets move on to grander stories. What remains is a cautionary whisper. Not all wars are worth singing about, and not every cause justifies a battlefield. You feel the lesson settling over you like a blanket. These pointless wars, remembered only in scraps and sarcastic asides, are the lullabies of history, teaching you that humans have always been experts at wasting time. Now the dust settles, and your footsteps slow. The battlefield fades into a quiet plain where no one fights anymore. The spears are gone, the helmets lie half buried in the earth, and the only sound is the soft rustle of wind across dry grass. The cows graze undisturbed, the goats wander in lazy circles, and the fields that once drew armies are just stretches of soil beneath a wide, sleepy sky. You let your breathing deepen as the images soften, each detail smoothing into the next. The clash of bronze and the shouting of warriors drift further away, until they are nothing more than faint echoes, dissolving like mist at sunrise. The earth smells of comsoil, not of blood or dust, and the horizon stretches with the promise of quiet mornings. Your body feels heavier, as though sinking gently into the same soil that once caused so much trouble. Only now it holds you safely, like a cradle. The pointless wars are long over, their memory dim, their noise silenced. All that remains is the certainty that even the most ridiculous conflicts eventually fade into peace. So you rest now, surrounded by the hush of forgotten plains, the stillness of empty pastures, and the unbroken rhythm of your own breath. Everything unnecessary falls away. Everything noisy drifts into silence, and you are safe, cradled by history's softest lullaby.